Today we're going to make a skirt. So I have all of my pieces cut out that I'm going to use. This is the front. It's been cut on a fold so that when it opens up there's no seam at center front. The other thing that I've done is I have made little tiny clips right there to indicate where my darts are. One clip at the top of each dart leg. And then I don't know if you can see it this close up, but right here on each side, there and there, these two locations, I made little tiny marks indicating the point of the dart. That's really ultimately all I need to do the dart. If it makes more sense, you could actually draw it in, but I feel confident enough with my dart sewing skills that I can do it with just those. So that's the front. The other thing I have is my facing for my front, which is also cut on a fold, and I have a piece of inner facing that's also cut on a fold so that when they open up, I haven't fused these together yet, but I will. I've got my back pieces, two of them. They were not cut on fold because the zipper is going to go center back, along with two pieces of inner facing cut in the same shape. And then the final thing that I have is my back piece. And this one has a vent, so down at the bottom you'll see this shape. That's going to show up on both sides. And I have also done the same thing on the back. I have my notches, the two legs of the dart clipped, as well as a mark right here indicating where the point of the dart is. Once I've done that and I'm all set, I'm going to go and finish on the serger. So I'm not going to show this because it's just going to go through the serger to finish the edge. The next thing I'm doing is I'm going to go and I'm going to serge the edge of all of these long vertical sides, the two side seams, and on the back, down the center back, and I'm going to pivot, come over here, and then I'll take it out of the serger and just do one long serge just going straight down through here as well. I'm not going to do any of my horizontal, like my hem I'll finish all in one go later. I'm not going to do any serging on the facing pieces, so this I'm just going to put aside and come back and revisit later. But on the front, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to leave the top alone, but I'm going to serge both of the long sides down to the hem. Once I do that, I'm going to go and sew the darts. And to do that, I'm actually going to link in the video how to sew darts so that you don't have to watch me. So I will come back once I have all the serging done and my darts sewn. But I'll put a tutorial video, I'll link a tutorial video to how to sew darts so that this video doesn't have to be too long. So if you don't know how to do darts, go watch that video and then meet me back here once the side seams are serged. All vertical seams on the back are serged, and the darts are all sewn. So I have sewn my darts. I pressed them towards center back or towards center front, whatever side of the garment they're on. And then I've serged all of the side seams, and I've serged the center back seam as well as these angles right here and this long section down into the kick pleat. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the back and put this right sides together to figure out my next steps. So I've got it right sides together. The next thing I'm going to do with it right sides together, I'm going to kind of open it up. I'm going to have it like this with the kick pleat on the left side as I'm looking at it from the bottom. I'm going to open it up just so I can keep track of stuff. We always want the kick pleat to be able to take our right hand and slide it underneath the kick pleat like this. So it's always going to go off to the left side of the skirt. So when the kick pleat opens as a person's walking, if I flip this up, I can see my serged line right here, and that's totally fine. Unless it flips up, no one's going to see that, and that's okay. This, however, I don't want people to see that serge. So I'm going to take the right back of the skirt, and I'm going to take my serge. So if you didn't serge, that's totally fine on this particular spot because I'm going to fold it in 1/4 of an inch. and then I'm going to fold it in another 1/4 of an inch so that it's a nice clean finish. And then I'm going to come in and do a stitch line exactly a 1/16 of an inch away from this edge right here, not the fold side, so not this side out here, but the side closest to the garment. I'm going to sew it down at a 1/16 of an inch so that when someone's walking, all they see is a nice line of stitching right there. So I'm going to take the camera over to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you that. And then as soon as I'm done with that, I'll show you what next step I'm going to do so that I don't have to come over to this spot and explain it again. I'm going to put them right sides together. This will be folded back and stitched into place. So there will be, because I'm using 1/2 inch seam allowances, there will be a gap from the edge of the bottom piece. There will be a gap from there over to my new folded and sewn edge right here. I'm going to match those up, and I'm going to be sewing from about 7 to 8 inches down. Start back stitching right here. So down to here. Once you are a 1/2 inch over and a 1/2 inch down from this angle, so the point right there, you're going to leave the needle down and pivot and come over and back stitch in this area right here. The reason I'm starting partially down is because I'm going to insert an invisible zipper up here. I will also link a video to how to sew an invisible zipper. So I'm not going to show how to insert an invisible zipper on this video. Go watch the other video if you need to do that, but I'm leaving that opening in this section so that you can do that later. So I'm going to take the camera over now and I'll sew first this, and then I'll sew the back, center back seam into the kick pleat. All right, I'm going to sew that fold on the kick pleat like I just talked about. Start with a little back stitch. Trim my threads. Always a good idea to trim your threads as you go so you don't have to come back later and trim a ridiculous amount of them. Once that's done, I'm going to take, I've marked 8 inches down from the top because that's how much of a zipper I'm going to put in. 7 to 8 inches is a good amount for a zipper. The average depth of the hip from the waist is about 7 inches. So around there is the length that you want. I'm going to make sure everything's good. Right sides together. And I'm sewing at 1/2 inch because that is my seam allowance. If you're using a pattern from that's got 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you'd be sewing at 5/8 instead. Make sure everything's lined up the way that you want it to be. And go to town. Once I approach the kick pleat, when I'm about 1/2 inch away from where I need to pivot, I'm actually going to decrease my stitch length just a little bit because I am going to have to do a little clip right here. Make sure that when you pivot, the top edge of that is in line with the 1/2 inch, so I guess I need to go 1 stitch further. Perfect. And then sew down the kick pleat and back stitch at the end. Now that I've sewn the center back seam, I'm going to lay it down so my right hand can go underneath there. So I'm going to look at the back. So I'm going to hold the kick pleat as though it's in its final position. And I haven't pressed the center back seam yet. I just wanted to figure out which direction the kick pleat needed to go so that I can make sure I clip it correctly. So when you turn it over, you should see your line of stitching on the kick pleat on top, and the one underneath it should be the longer one. And then what I'm going to do is come in with some scissors, and only on the top layer, so I'm not clipping both layers, only on the top layer, I am clipping to but not through that corner that I stitched so that I can press my center back seam open and this can lay flat. And then I'm going to go and press that in place. Once that is pressed in place, I will go back over to the regular sewing machine and insert my zipper. So that will be off camera. And then I will show you the stitch that I'll do here to keep this in place, but that will be after I press it. When I press, I'm going to make sure that the center back seam goes smoothly into this kick pleat right here. So when it's all done, what you'll see is just a nice straight line. If it's laying flat, you shouldn't really even be able to tell, but it'll be a nice straight line all the way down, and this kick pleat will be pressed into place. I'll do that, and then I will also, when I get over to the sewing machine, after I do a top stitch here to hold the kick pleat in place, I will also be sewing the side seams. So I will be taking my front piece and putting these right sides together, and I'm going to sew the side seams at my seam allowance. So I have finished putting the zipper in, which you can see on another video. So here's my invisible zipper. And then the other thing that I've done is I have pinned, you can see this is really well pressed down here. This is where my kick pleat is. I have pinned it really, really well on the inside so that I know it's exactly where it should be. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to sew, and it's hard to see because it's white on white, but right here is the beginning of the seam allowance for this kick pleat. And I'm going to sew exactly on top of that seam allowance, that stitch line all the way down to the end. And I'm going to do it for the wrong side. If you're going to do it from the wrong side, you have to make sure that your tension is perfect on both sides. If it's not, it'll look kind of wonky from the other side. I mean, you always want to make sure your tension's perfect anyways, but this is one of those times that it definitely needs to be perfect. Otherwise, you'll see some weirdness from the outside. I like doing it from the inside because then I know that I'm sewing exactly on top of my other line of stitching. I'm just going to start with a nice little back stitch and just go nice and easy exactly on top of that stitch line all the way down until the end, and then back stitch there. So that what we end up with, after we trim our threads, what we end up with on the outside is a perfect diagonal line from here to here of stitching. If it's a matching thread, then it really won't matter. You won't really be able to notice it all that much. The only place I really notice it is across this little gray polka dot right there. Everything else is good to go. And what that does is it holds the kick pleat so that it doesn't fall down. Now what I can do is I am going to increase my stitch length. I'm going to increase my stitch length to like a 4. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to sew my side seams. I'm going to sew my side seams with a 4 because as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to go stick this on the person I'm making this for. And make sure it fits. And if it does fit perfectly, then I'll just sew back over that line that I've already sewn with a regulation stitch. If it doesn't, and I need to do some alterations and pinch it in or let it out like a 1/16 of an inch or whatever, I mean more like an 1/8 of an inch. If I need to do any alterations, it'll be easy for me to unpick it with a 4 rather than a 2.5. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the side seams, and then I'm going to go fit it to my person. I have yet to do anything with my facings yet because I wanted to, if I need to do any alterations while I'm sewing the facing pieces together, I want to know about that right now. And I'm not going to know that until I do this step right here. If it does fit perfect, you don't need to unpick this last line of stitching. You just need to sew right on top of it. And it's going to get pressed open, so no one's even going to see it. And now I'm going to go do the fitting. Once I know about the fitting, then I can do the hem and I can do the facings. Okay, so I checked with my model and it fit perfect. So I went back and I serged all my I restitched over my side seams so that they are all good now. So I can go in and press them flat, which I also already did. The other thing that I just barely did off camera, because I didn't want to have to set up the camera specifically just for one little tiny seam at the bottom, I went in and serged the bottom. And I made sure that all of my side seams were pressed open as well as my back. And then on the back seam, I came through and I just let the kick pleat open up to serge it flat. I did not serge it down together. I serged with it open. Because the next thing that we're going to do is we can hem it right now, because while it was on her, I also checked that the hem was good. And then the other thing that we can do is get our facing ready. Okay, so for the bottom, what I'm going to do is grab an iron, and I am going to press it 2 inches up. At least that is the hem that I have chosen to do. So go ahead and grab a ruler, some way to measure. So that's 2 inches. So I'm just going to go ahead and press 2 inches all the way around the hem. I will be sewing this hem by hand. I'm going to be using a blind hem stitch. I can link that in the description as well. There's a couple skills that are really just kind of nice to know. Blind hem is one of them, and so there's just a tutorial for that separately, and it just happens to apply in this moment. So there's lots of individual skills that go into this that you can learn at a different time and then apply it. As we come in to the other side of the kick pleat, so the first part of the kick pleat, I just pressed it up 2 inches. The next part of the kick pleat, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to miter this edge actually. And to get it set to miter, which I will also link a mitering video in the description as well, for you to know how to do that, so you can watch that offline as well. But I'm just doing this so that I can get a good reference point for where this point is right here, which I'm going to pin. And where this point is right here. So I've got one on the hem and I've got one on the kick plate. And then that will give me enough information with all of the pressing that I've done, which will give me that point right there to be able to do the mitered corner. So I'm just going to make sure those pins in there are in there nice and secure. And then I can take that over to the machine and do my miter. I'll do that off camera and just put that description, that other video description into the that other video link in the description. On the top, I need to get ready for my facing. So what I'm going to do is I've got my front facing, and I'm going to be looking at the wrong side of the fabric, right side down. And then I'm going to be using this fusible interfacing right here. Make sure it's a woven or a knit, no non-wovens. Those are great for crafts, but they're not particularly good for clothing, usually. And I'm going to make sure that the glue side is down, so the little grit on it is supposed to go down. Make sure it's all lined up, and then we're going to press it into place. We're not gonna run the iron back and forth. We're gonna hold it down for whatever the description is when you buy your interfacing. Look at it. Usually it's around 10 to 15 seconds, and use steam. So I'm just gonna hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, and I'm gonna do that all the way across the front. I probably did that a little bit less than 15, but it's okay. I'm gonna do this on the front piece, and then I'm gonna do it on the back piece. All right, I have pressed on my interfacing on the backs and on the front. And now what I'm gonna do is put the right side up, and I'm gonna lay my back facings down. And now I'm gonna go take this over to the sewing machine and sew 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. And I'm not gonna change the camera view because that's like moving the camera for literally 2 inches and 2 inches. So sewing down here at my seam allowance. So I have now sewn together my facing. So it's in one long strip. I'm gonna press open these side seams. Like so. Once I've pressed open my side seams, I'm also not going to change the camera angle for this. I'm going to go over and I'm going to serge from here all the way through until here on the bottom edge. I'm not going to worry about serging these because they'll be on the inside. They're going to be enclosed. Nobody will actually be able to see it. It's sandwiched between several layers of fabric, so it'll end up being just fine. I'm going to go serge it, and then I will meet you back at the sewing machine. All right, I have my facing piece that's been serged along the bottom. And I have my skirt. It's all basically done. The hem's been pressed up. I finished my miter to edge down here. The other thing, so all of this will get done by hand, and I'm not going to show that on camera. I'm just going to tell you I'm doing a blind hem stitch from here all the way around. I'll review that at the very end though. I've got my zipper open, and I've got my zipper up here where we reach the top, folded back. It's not folded open, it's folded back. And it's finished space. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna turn the skirt right side out. I find it a little bit easier to sew it this orientation. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna match up the side seams. The inside needs all seams need to be pressed open. There's the side seams. So first matching those up, I'm going to match up my center fronts. So it'll be right there in the middle. If your pattern was good, well, rather, the pattern is good, we can usually make the assumption that if it's being sold, that it's probably a good pattern. Everything should line up. If it doesn't line up, it might mean that your sewing was off. You might have sewn one seam allowance different than another. This is the other area we need to be concerned about. So after all of that's pinned, when we get to this back area right here, I can see the zipper's folded back. It's going to be spaced 1/2 inch away from the raw edge of my facing. So here's my facing piece. 1/2 inch in is where I'm going to place that zipper. Well, just the folded edge of the front. That's important for it to be there because we need to fold it back later. So there's a finishing detail that we need to do later, and it's important for that to be spaced back. So just give yourself a good amount of pins to make sure everything's lined up. throughout the video, you've probably noticed I don't usually pin a lot. I usually just trust my pattern. Depending on the kind of fabric I'm using, if it's like a silky fabric, I tend to pin a little bit more because I don't want it to move on me. But a lot of times I don't actually end up using a lot of pins because I trust my pattern. But this is one of those times that I like to pin so that I don't have to worry about it. Now what I'm going to do is just sew around the top at 1/2 inch, putting it all together. As you go, make sure that your darts are going the correct orientation that you want them to. In this case, I'm having them go towards center back and center front. Remove your pins as you go. Don't sew over the pins. There are very few times whenever I will sew actually over a pin. Make sure all your side seams are all pressed open. Yourself a back stitch, trim your threads, and then we need to do some understitching. So what you're going to do before you understitch is some of these curves up here they're not extreme, but they're going to cause a little bit of grief. So I'm just going to go along. Some better scissors than those clippers. Know that these are much better. I'm just going about every inch or so, especially in the curviest spots, and just clipping. This is thin enough fabric that I'm actually not as concerned about trimming and grading, but if you're using really, really thick fabric, you may consider grading, which means that I would take this part that's closest to the outside and I would trim just that layer back to 1/4 inch. So I'd come around and just clip that off all the way around, just the one layer, so it sort of feathers my seam allowance. It's a good technique to use. I'm not going to worry about it this time. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to fold my facing up so that I'm looking at the right side of it, and I am going to make sure all of my seam allowances are going up right now, so going towards the facing. And I'm going to do some understitching at 1/16 inch, starting at the very, very raw edge of my facing. I'm going to do 1/16 inch all the way around, just keeping that nice and taut. You can go in and press if you want to get that nice and ready, but I'm going to be holding it fairly taut, so I'm not particularly concerned. And I'm sewing at 1/16 inch. And there we go. That is the last time we need to use the sewing machine on this project. Everything else will be done by hand. So I'm going to go back over and we can finalize all of my final steps and we'll be done. Okay, the rest of everything is going to be done with slip stitches and blind hem stitches. So what I'm going to do is I've got this done here. I've got my understitching right here. I think you can see that. Now what I'm going to do, and this is the reason why we left this 1/2 inch, looking at the inside next to the zipper, and I'm going to fold this down that 1/2 inch. We can press it right now if you want to hold that in place, or just grab a ton of pins and get ready to pin the heck out of it. So fold that back, and then we're going to fold it down And we're going to leave about 1/8 of an inch of a gap between this fold and our zipper teeth. And it's just going to lay nice and easy right there. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in there, holding it in place. To hold this and sew this in place, I'm going to do a slip stitch from here to here, and then it'll be done. The other thing I'm going to do is on the side seams where the facing comes down, I'm going to do a hand tack right here. Just tie a knot connecting the side seam to the side right there. So then it's not flopping around on the inside. This is a good time to just come in and press everything really well. Because we did understitching, everything's going to favor to the inside really beautifully. So we're not going to see any of that understitching or any top stitching or anything on the outside of the garment. It should lay nice and easy, just like that. And come in here and pin at the side seam as I go around. Do the same thing to this other side. I'm going to fold it in. Actually liked pressing it right there really quick. Don't burn yourself. That's a great time to accidentally burn yourself. And then it's going to fold down. It'll be about 1/8 of an inch away from those zipper teeth. And I'm going to hold that in place as I pin. Now, this is one time to do a quality check for yourself to make sure everything is really good. On the outside, just come and zip it up really quick. Yeah, you're going to be working around some pins, but make sure that when you folded it down, that top edge is nice and even, which mine is. The other thing you want to check as you're doing it is that on the inside, the bottom of the facing right here also perfectly lines up. Once those are perfectly lined up and you have everything pinned in place, just go ahead and open that zipper back up so that it's down out of the way. And go ahead and do a good press of everything else to get it to do what you want it to do. The other places you can do some little tacks so that the facing is not flopping around as each of the darts. So I can tack right here just to the dart. I'm not tacking all the way through the garment. I'm only tacking to the actual dart so that you don't see any stitching on the outside. But I can tack it there. And I can tack it right here. On the back, it's probably going to be less of an issue on the back than it is on the front because you've got it attached to the center back. But we can also go ahead and tack it at the back darts as well. So now I have a ridiculous number of pins, and I'll just know that wherever there's a pin, some sort of hand stitching needs to be done. So there is that. And then on the bottom, I mentioned I was going to talk about this again. I am going to, let me turn this skirt inside out so it's easier to show. On this section right here, I'm going to slip stitch from here to here. And then I'm going to blind hem stitch all the way around the entire thing until here at this corner. And then I'm going to blind hem from the corner up to here, so that all loose edges are held down. Once I'm done with that, this skirt is completely done, and I can give it to whoever is going to be wearing it and call it a day.